Are there theologians that are looking at things along this line, like can we measure our economic growth and progress differently? The Genuine Progress Index, which measures how well are people doing. I don't know. That's
there are all kinds of models of looking at these things differently, and some theologians are picking that up. I'm not the only one writing on religion and economics. I mean, in the book you find some footnotes that point to that. However, I mean, I would add another perspective that I don't find discussed much, and that's not simply the index of well-being. And not even the index, I mean, distribution is what we talk about a lot, right? Who is rich, who is poor, who has access to what. But a deeper issue even there is not so much just distribution, it's production. I mean, it's one thing to say that a lot more people now have colored televisions than they used to have in the past. The other question is how many more people are actually able to participate meaningfully in economic production. What kind of jobs do we have in our work? How do people actually relate to the work life? And I think that's another question. I mean, that's one of the key questions I'm raising in that book, to say we really need to look at work from that perspective again, because that's I mean, even if you still make enough money to survive, you may have to work a job that's completely dehumanizing. And that's not just in industry and where we usually suspect it. This is happening more and more, even in churches, where the sort of jobs that we're developing, the sort of structure that we give ourselves is dehumanizing for some of the employers down on that list. That even applies to issues like consumerism. This is something that gets oftentimes critiqued when theologians talk about economics. So we shouldn't be so consumeristic, and we shouldn't want more stuff all the time and all that. But the underlying issue of consumerism is that the economy needs to keep producing stuff, and therefore, production needs, advertisement needs to communicate to people that they need to buy more stuff. It's not just whether I decide to buy more stuff, but there's a whole system that's dependent on making me buy more stuff. And buying more stuff is the way it's sold. It's not about material. You don't need a new car every 2 years. But by getting a new car every 2 years, you're getting more happiness, more safety for your family, a better ride, or all these metaphysical values that get sold that way. But at the basis of it is really production and the need to pump out more stuff for a growing economy. So the sort of blind faith that I was talking about in the beginning, of course, thrives by covering a lot of this up. Thrives by keeping the lid on what's really happening in the economy and in the world. Ron, you get the last question.
Good. Okay, and I think it relates exactly to what you just said. Many of us have been concerned about the actions of the State Board of Education of Texas related to proposed amendments for social studies, that is, the social studies standard. What will be taught to our young children in the public schools in Texas, kindergarten through 12th grade, about who we are, how we got to be who we are, both within this country and in the world. And just what I'd like for you to react to is one of their proposed amendments, throughout all of the grade levels in social studies, is to remove the word capitalism to describe our system of economics and replace it with free market enterprise system. So in light of what you just said about covering up, I'm wondering if you could just help us think about what happens when, with the language that we use to talk about reality and this whole notion of framing and how words help us move us in certain directions but not in others. Because the standards as they've been proposed are clearly about faith and economics all the way through. but it's a different kind of faith in economics than what you've been talking about.
Exactly, and you know that shows you the importance of this sort of blind faith that I was talking about in the beginning. I mean, if blind faith were just some frills around a system that would otherwise work just fine, you wouldn't need it, and you wouldn't have to have high-paid economists and high-paid pastors to keep this vision going. But it's very closely related to keep it going, to keep these images going without ever spelling out what they mean. And so you don't talk about capitalism, you talk about freedom. Now, of course, the question, capitalism is indeed about freedom. What is not said is, whose freedom are we talking about? Well, it's the freedom of big money to do things, and it's the belief that if big money has the freedom to do things, this will benefit everybody. But it's a belief, it's not something that's really empirically worked out. If you read, I'm a religious reader of the Dallas Morning News business section. Religiously reading business news. What is it that you never find there, or hardly ever? Of course, maybe you don't need the word capitalism, but it's underlying. What you rarely find is labor, is a reference to work. What's happening in workers' life. Last Wednesday, I met this young archivist at the University of Texas at Arlington. I didn't know there was the Texas Labor Archives at UT Arlington. And they have an exhibit on labor in Texas opening May 17th. If you're out there in the Arlington area, you might want to check it out. It sounds interesting. But she spoke, and she said at that meeting, she said, we're collecting this because this history will never make it into the history books. This is something that people aren't even aware of. And so people think this is either fantasy, or it can't ever happen, or the world will blow up before capitalism ends. But reality is, it's already there. But labor, I think, is another word that we'd have to kind of revitalize again. Now, what we're doing then, as a result, in this context, is not simply critiquing and exposing blind faith. We're again making our faith, Christian faith, work in this situation. We're now going back to the Gospels, talk about Jesus, talk about the sorts of things that we have covered up in this language. Talk about the fact that Jesus was, what was he, a carpenter? Or was he really day labor construction, which is much closer to his actual status? Not a carpenter with a little shop, building furniture, but a day laborer in construction who could be kicked out at any minute. So there's a labor. Who was Moses? Well, the first recorded labor leader in history, right? That sort of thing could well be helpful in rebuilding an alternative. There's a final question I want to leave you with, and this may sound a bit, just pious Sunday school language, but think about it. Maybe part of the problem with Christianity is that we haven't thought too much about the radical alternative of Jesus, and so for a while we've talked about what would Jesus do, which usually works, to think of a first century guy in a long flowing robe, a bit out of date. Don't quite know what he would do if he were here, but what if we ask the questions as Christians? What is Jesus doing? What is Jesus doing now? And if you ask the question that way, I think it becomes very quickly clear that it doesn't make sense to think of Jesus as spending most of his time sitting in pews or preaching from pulpits or going to church or doing the sort of stuff that nice church people mostly do. What is Jesus doing now? If this is something that Christians care about, if Christians somehow believe in the resurrection, however you want to put it, that may be the question. What is Jesus doing? Perhaps that would help us to push beyond blind faith, right? Lame walk, deaf hear, the blind see, the dead are raised, and the poor have the good news preached to them. What is Jesus doing? Well, there it is. Thank you so much. I'll stop here. Enjoyed the conversation.